Hello everybody, last session of the day, well done, home stretch, nearly made it. So there's no shortage of books, courses, coaching, conference sessions these days on being agile and running an agile team. But have you ever worked as a software solution provider where you've adopted agile practices in your team? You're doing TDD, you're doing Scrum, you're doing Kanban, continuous integration, all of these really good things. But around the team, there is like a massive grey cloud, this spectre of more traditional project management practices, commercial practices, which are like a big grey cloud hanging over your development team. More time spent arguing about whether things are in or out of scope than just getting on and doing things. More time spent doing bureaucratic change request processes than just getting on and delivering the software. Hardly in the spirit of the Agile Manifesto. What was it again? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Maybe this is familiar to you, I don't know. My name's Camilla Brown. I work as a engineering manager / Scrum Master / project manager / whatever you want to call somebody who basically helps people deliver software. What I'd like to do today is talk to you about my experience in trying to push some of these agile processes outside of the development team up to the project, through to the legal and commercial level, to really make it all a much better experience, both for you as a software supplier and also for the customer to get a better end result. So it's not necessarily the right way that I'm proposing here. This is just what I've done. I have to say, when I first set out trying to do things a little bit differently, I wasn't really overwhelmed with literature about there on how to change things at that higher level. So this is really about what I've done in my situation, but I'd be really interested to hear from any of you guys. Maybe you've solved a problem, you can just tell me how to do it. That would be great. So just a show of hands, who here is a software developer? Yeah, quite a lot. Managery types? Yeah, okay, half. And who's in-house? Oh, just a smattering. And so everybody else is delivering software to other people. Would that be a show of hands? Yeah-ish. Okay. Well, hopefully some of this will ring true for some of you. So just a bit of background. So I work at Sony in sunny Basingstoke. It's actually quite a nice place, contrary to many myths. So this is Sony Professional, so no PlayStations, no movies, no TVs. This is the business-to-business part of Sony. Sony Professional deals in various markets, medical, education, but broadcast is one particular market which is very big for Sony Professional. And this has come from very much a hardware background where Sony makes a lot of products in this area. So a typical project, a typical broadcast project would consist of, for example, fitting out a studio or delivering an outside broadcast truck with lots of kit in, all plugged together. So these are the sorts of things you might get, tape decks, video routers, cameras, link them together with some SDI cables, some serial cables, and then, everything works, easy peasy. In the past, the transfer method was tape, so, there didn't used to be any file or IP or anything like that. You'd get your video from A to B by putting it on a tape and then people cutting up the tape. But over the years, like many industries, IT and broadcast have converged, and these days people want IT media solutions. Files come in as actual files that MOVs or whatever, and we have to plug it all together with IP. So, well, hey, it's easy, isn't it? We just replace some of these hardware components with software components and follow the same process as before. How hard can it be? So, over the years, I've moved from software developer to team lead to more of a management type, and I've seen various projects done in this way with varying degrees of success. So first of all, I'll just highlight a couple of headaches which may or may not be familiar to you. So headache one is you've signed up to a fixed price, fixed scope contract. And at the start, the solution architects, the pre-sales people, they all went away. They came up with a design, and people thought, yeah, it'd be great. We could take this component from vendor A, this component from vendor B, but we'll get them to add on a bit of custom API. We'll put our own product in at the bottom. It'll all work fine, won't it? But over time, it becomes apparent that without some fundamental redesign of the solution, maybe because of some requirement that wasn't properly understood at the start, no fault of anybody really, these things happen, things start to go a bit wrong, but because of the fixed price, fixed scope nature of the project, there's no will to do the bold thing and just refactor it or change the design, because at the end of the day, you've committed to delivering something for a certain price. And if the developers are saying, look, we need to scrap that bit and bring in a new bit, or we need to rewrite that bit, the will of the project is often to not do that. So as a developer, it can be very frustrating. You get forced to make your software work in ways that you never believed possible. But anyway, if you're lucky, it'll all work, and maybe your customer will sign the magical acceptance certificate at the end. The other headache, another common one, you finished the software or the solution, customers using it, they're in acceptance phase, and they say, well, this is an issue, you need to fix that. But then as the supplier, you say, well, that's clearly not an issue, that's a feature request, and then you spend months maybe arguing about this, and if you're lucky, you might come to some agreements. If you're unlucky, these sorts of things can go on for a very, very, very long time. So you can imagine, having seen various projects over the years, the trepidation I felt for the impending day when my manager would say to me, Camilla, we'd like you to take on project managing the blah-de-blah project. Would I suffer the same fate? So the project I was given was, again, about media logistics. And the original project, which I didn't do, one of my colleagues delivered, was about moving from a tape-based system to a file-based system. And the system, as your probably technical types, is as technical as it gets, I'm afraid. There was an asset management system provided by Sony, one of our products. We had an enterprise service bus with some kind of core stuff that we do, plus some custom workflows. Lots of third-party software that we integrated, transcoders, transfer software, lots of video-y type stuff. And media logistics is all about, as a broadcaster, you've got lots of videos coming in, you want to do stuff to them, you want to make sure that they're good quality, you might check them, and then essentially you want to send the videos out again to be viewed either on linear TV or over IP, that kind of thing. So phase one, which I didn't do, was your traditional waterfall style project. There was a paid-for design consultancy where everybody decided exactly what they were going to do, and then implementation and delivery. The implementation delivery took about a year, and actually, of all the projects I've seen, this has been probably the most successful one, which obviously credit to my colleagues who delivered the project, but also credit to the customer. The customer's a commercial broadcaster and really wanted to go live with this thing, and they were very pragmatic. And the thing that was amazing was how much, where we came to headache number 2 that I described earlier about things being issues or features, if there was this argument, they say, well, that's fine, we'll just work around it. And they were quite good at your kind of, in your garage, knocking up some scripts to work around the solution for now so that they could go live, which was very impressive, and not all customers are like that. So at this point, my colleague, who was an engineering manager, subbed out to do project management, decided he wanted to get back to product development. Project management there was enough for him. And I took over for a phase 2A. So again, pretty waterfall-like. We did a bit of consultancy at the start to discuss what we were going to implement. But we took, instead of waterfall, we took a water scrumfall approach. So we had the spec for what we were going to deliver specified up front. but we did 5 releases to the customer once a month to deliver the piece of work that we decided at the beginning. And it went reasonably well. I was fairly new to project management at the start. As expected, we got to sort of around delivery 2, delivery 3, and the things that we'd specified in the paid-for design consultancy at the start started to unwind a bit. So then you have to make changes. There's a change request process. You fill in the forms. You figure out how much it's going to cost. But it was fine. We delivered, and the customer was still pretty happy with us. So they said, we want to do more, but we want to be more agile. As your customer, I want to receive a monthly delivery. That's great. We've been doing that, so tick for that one. But I want to maintain a list of prioritized items. I've got a backlog of stuff. And I want to be able to move things around the backlog pretty much any day of the week, because my business priorities are changing all the time. And I just want to concentrate on specifying the items at the top of the backlog. I don't want to specify all my items up front, so that I can meet my business needs as effectively as possible. So I was like, great, this is really great. I want to be more agile. This waterfall thing, it's just not me at all. But how do we do that at a commercial basis? So, first port of call, the lawyers. What on earth are the lawyers going to say about this? So, I didn't know much about this kind of thing before this, but a traditional fixed price, fixed scope contract normally consists of your master services agreement, called an MSA typically, and this sets out the terms and conditions under which you're going to work with your customer. So things like warranty, purchasers' obligations, clean site access, escrow maybe might be included there. So this will typically take a long time to negotiate, especially when you've got corporate legal teams involved. They can spend a long time talking about these things. And then what you have is a statement of work. Now, this is the thing which is different per instance of the contract, and that details the scope. So this is, I was mentioning earlier about how everybody goes off and comes up with their design. That goes into the statement of work, how much it's going to cost, and what timescales we're going to deliver against. And as far as I understand, that's fairly standard way that contracts work for this sort of thing. So I spoke to our legal counsel and explained what I wanted to do. We want to be agile. We want to deliver random stuff every month. How can we have a contract for this? And she was actually really understanding, and she dug out some agile sample contracts from the web. If you do a bit of searching, there are various agile contracts that you can download. But the problem with it was this is the original MSA, the Master Services Agreement, had taken months to negotiate. And the customer wanted to get going straight away. And our legal counsel, she said, look, if we go back to square one with the contract, we're not going to be started for another 6 months. But she said, I think there's a way we can do this. So instead of saying what we were going to deliver, she said, well, we can just modify it to say what sort of things are going to be delivered. And she thought that the legal people would be happy if then we referred to the process for determining what will be delivered. So she'd picked up on all my explanations of Agile and sprints and sprint planning and backlogs. And she said, well, that's all great. I think we can work with this. So she said, what you need to do is you need to write the process, and it needs to be referred to by the contract. So typically in an IT contract, you sign the contract and then the project manager comes on board. And as part of the startup process, again, if any of you have done Prince 2, you'll be familiar with the sort of things. You start the project and you do your communication strategy, your strategy for reporting, strategy for how you're going to deliver it. So what I did is I wrote a project approach, which actually went to the lawyers, and it got legally filed in terms of the way I'd written it, and that formed a part of the contract. So what we were doing, instead of ripping up the old contract, we were tweaking the existing contract and kind of jamming in our own Agile approach into the existing contract. So the project approach, so what did I talk about in there? So we had to define various terms for things. We talked about the backlog, this prioritized list of things, roles and responsibilities. So now this is crucial really, because some customers might get a software supplier to deliver a solution because basically they just want to wait for the software to be delivered, and they're quite happy to sit back and wait for it to turn up. But for this Agile approach to work, you've really got to have the customer engaged, and the product owner role needs to sit on the customer side. So it's vitally important that those roles and responsibilities get written in and the customer's signing up to those roles and responsibilities. We talk about the ceremonies, sprint planning, sprint retrospectives, sprint reviews, and again, it's all about making sure that it's well understood what the customer's buying into by doing this process. There's no point doing this process if they're not going to be available for all these Agile type things. Estimation talks about that, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. And also acceptance. So again, a normal waterfall project, you'd get to the end and you'd have a great big acceptance, which can go on for days, weeks, or even months. But because we're delivering per sprint or per iteration, because we're going to do a Scrum style process, we're going to be getting acceptance basically at the end of each iteration, because we're going to deliver working software for each sprint. So that was the project approach, and as I say, this was the first time that a project approach had formed part of any of our contractual documentation for any of our professional contracts. So the plan, now if you've ever worked with bid managers love a plan. The first thing they say if you work with a bid manager is, where's the plan, Microsoft project plan? So I was like, well, that kind of goes away really, because we're doing all these things, not necessarily in this order, and we're doing them all the time, and I'm not going to tell you when we're going to do them, because we need to do them on an ongoing basis. You know, we're backlog grooming, the customer's prioritizing that, we're taking a look, we're doing workshops, we're doing design discussions, specifying, we're breaking things down, we're doing our planning poker sessions, you know, all good Agile things. And then we've basically got our sprints, because we're going to do a Scrum style process. So we plan the sprint, we do our development in the sprint, we demo to the customer, and then we release it to the users. And then we just do the same again. So it always makes me chuckle that whenever we do a new statement of work for another phase, the bid manager says, so we need to update the plan. I'm like, but the plan's the same. There is no plan. We just do the same thing. But once I give him the dates of the iterations, he always goes off and creates a Microsoft project plan. So if you're listening, Paul, on video, thank you for all the Microsoft project plans you've done for me over the years. So that's the legal part sorted out. But then, how are we going to sell it? So we know what we're going to do, and the legal people are happy, but what are we selling? So the two main models are fixed price, fixed scope, which we talked about earlier. So this is a bit like getting somebody to build you an extension. You tell them what you want, and they say, right, we'll do it for this price, and it'll take this long. Or there's time and materials, where essentially you're paying for the time that somebody spends on the work. So you pay maybe by the hour or by the day. You'll have different rates. And you also pay for any materials that have to be bought as part of the process. So fixed price, fixed scope is generally regarded as the risk being with the vendor. So this is because you're going to sign up to a particular price based on your understanding of what needs to be delivered. But more often than not, if there are any mistakes in that understanding, then your costs as a supplier are going to far exceed what you originally thought. Some say that actually fixed price, fixed scope is risky for the end customer, because quite often they'll get through the process and realize that what they said they wanted originally is not what they actually want. So there is a risk to them that they don't get a solution that works for them. But ultimately, I think the risk is primarily with the vendor. And then time and materials, well, the risk is with the purchaser because you're just paying for hours spent, but what's the guarantee that you're going to get anything useful after X number of hours have been spent on the project? So my customer was actually fairly warm to the idea of time and materials, but when pressed, they said, well, we could consider time and materials, but timesheets, no, we're not bothered about those. Hourly rates, no, we just want you to deliver stuff. So I said, well, how's that going to work then? But actually, a lot of the reluctance to do time and materials was also on the Sony side. How can we make sure that the customer is happy that we're delivering value for money? And then another sort of more cultural aspect to that is that Sony isn't really the sort of company that just hires out bodies. We're not one of these big consulting companies or companies that just has lots of people to hire out to do stuff. There were questions about intellectual property. What does that mean for our products if people are paying for time and materials? So time and materials was out. Fixed price, fixed scope, well, that's out because we haven't got any fixed scope. We're working from a backlog. It could be anything. So what we need is something else. How can we sell this thing? Does anybody have any ideas?
2 bodies full-time for the whole period that you're delivering, or whatever.
So time and materials.
Yeah, basically.
So how do you...
It's fixed, but it's a fixed cost too. So no time sheets, don't fill it in. It's just the same invoice.
So the last time... sorry, I'll get you. So the response there was 2 bodies for a fixed period of time, no timesheets, just pay for those 2 people. Or however many you want to bill for. So actually, the other time I've done this session, and I asked the same question, and there was a guy there who said, well, he did exactly that. So he worked for a very small company, and he said, well, we just have a monthly subscription and the customer pays us to do stuff and everything is open source, and if they don't like what we're delivering, then they can walk away at any time. And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, but I'm not sure that would work for a corporation because I'm not sure the legal people would be happy with it because they want to get they want to be assured that they're going to have something of value delivered. I'm not sure it will give them the business confidence, but I like it.
That is just time and material, just like fees for overtime.
But they didn't like the invoicing, so...
No, well, they want to be invoiced, but they don't want to have to deal with things like, as in, this person is a junior person and he's charged at £5 an hour. This person is a senior person and is £10 an hour. Did that junior person actually deliver anything for the time we spent on them?
The other options would be to price every feature or all the things in the backlog and price everything in the backlog. Or you could go on function points or something.
Yeah, so the suggestion there was to price each feature.
2 suggestions. One, to price each line on the specified lines, and you have an ongoing pricing, negotiation, auctioning, whatever. We'll do it for this, we'll do it for that, and then you actually negotiate each part when you've specified it sufficiently to price it and they know what
Yep.
you're getting.
Yep.
Like a running purchase.
Yep.
Or you could do function points.
Yeah, okay, fantastic suggestions. So the first suggestion was to price each item as you go along. Actually, I have a colleague who is doing that for another customer, another colleague of mine who's running a similar type of thing. The only problem, one of the problems with that, I think, is how you get commitment that they're going to pay for a certain amount of stuff for an ongoing time.
There's a minimum load and a maximum load.
And if they don't do the minimum load, yep.
They have to pay for some of that time. You put in penalties if they want to stop the process.
Yep. Yep. So the answer there was to put in a minimum, maximum load, penalties if they stop trying to procure additional work packages, essentially. But from what you're saying, you would have to price each one individually as you go along. So again, like that one, the only thing I don't like about that is you have to kind of think carefully about the price for each one, and it feels a bit more bureaucratic than your second suggestion, which was, what do you call it, functional points?
Yeah, you can metrics, how many fields
lines of code. Ooh. I think I could write a lot of lines of code if I was being paid for that. But yeah, some metric for delivering. Any other suggestions before I move on? Price it by sprint. And how do you know how much you're going to get per sprint, or do you just? Yep. 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 Yeah. Okay, all good suggestions, and all going along the sort of lines which I'll be going along. So let's just see what the project management methodologies say about this. So DSDM, it's now rebranded as Agile PM. What does it say about Agile contracts? So it says where the supplier and the customer are from different organizations and development is covered by a formal contract, the relationship must accommodate the evolution of the solution's requirements. Well, yes, that's what I'm trying to say, without imposing onerous change management overheads. And it does talk about measurement, so it talks about measuring outcome as opposed to output. So, I want my media logistics solution to enable me to deliver high-quality video to all the people who play it out, but it doesn't specify that in order to do that, we're going to have a GUI and we're going to have this and that, so outcome versus output. But it doesn't talk about that as a basis for a commercial relationship. So a bit more of a new kid on the block, Prince 2 Agile, which is like the Agile version of Prince 2. Which actually does a reasonable job of marrying up Agile and project management, if anybody's interested. So it says again, if possible, make the focus of what is being delivered outcome-based in preference to output-based. But again, I'm quite nervous about making my contract outcome-based. I really wouldn't want to sign up to something that talked about the outcome unless there were very clear metrics on what it was that the outcome was measured on. And actually, from the customer point of view, I don't think I'd want to sign up to that without having some idea of how my supplier was going to meet these outcomes. So that one doesn't really fly with me. But it does say a middle ground between outcome and output is to use things as service levels or throughputs, e.g. velocity. Story points, you mentioned functional points. So how can we sell the throughput? So story points. We all know about story points, right? Agile story points. There's always some debate on what is a story point. Is it complexity or is it effort? But let's just refer to Mike Cohn, big Agile person. And he says that story points represent the effort involved to deliver a product backlog item. So that's great. That's like where you were going with functional points. But I can hear you saying, well, hang on, that doesn't make sense because 5 points for this team here isn't the same as 5 points for this team here. It's a relative thing. Oops. So what we need to do is fall back onto the slightly lesser sibling of the story point, which is the ideal day, or ideal developer day. And in the project approach, which I mentioned earlier, what we did is define an ideal developer day and what it means. So the ideal developer day is a day where a developer can just get on with their job without undue interruptions, but doing anything related to the work that they're supposed to be working on. We actually started with points in the first contract and with this definition, but the customer was still pretty nervous about points, so we actually renamed everything from points to IDDs all the way through just to make them feel better. And then what we did is say, well, what goes into an ideal developer day, an IDD? Now, you could cut this various ways. You can say an ideal day consists of all your activities. But the way we cut it was to say, well, the ideal developer day is just the day developing the software. and we're going to make some assumptions about the activities that funnel into that and the activities that funnel out of that. So before the development, we're going to have workshops, design discussions, write some stories, and then once the software is ready, we're going to be doing some testing with the customer. We've got to deploy it, we've got to do demos, bug boards, that kind of thing. Now, again, we're making an assumption here, and some features, you might find that the funnel at the top is very wide because it takes you ages to get something that you're discussing with the customer to the point that you can develop it. And there may be other features where that funnel at the top is going to be very narrow because the customer says, well, please can you implement this? And we'll say, yes, that's really obvious, we'll go ahead and implement it. But when you put together your costing, you're making an assumption about all these kind of overhead activities that go on to facilitate the developer getting on with actually developing the software. So then our statement of work becomes really simple. All the customer says is actually, I want to buy 100 IDDs over 6 monthly drops for £500. All really simple. What could possibly go wrong? So what we end up here is actually not too dissimilar from fixed scope, because we're defining in the story what we're going to deliver, and we have effectively a price per IDD. So what we've got is kind of like a story level, fixed price, fixed scope. As a vendor, I'm making a commitment to deliver a particular story, which we've estimated for, say, 3 IDDs. Now, if it turns out that it takes a week or 2 weeks to implement, then, we've estimated it wrong. And there may be some stories where we slightly overestimate and some stories where we slightly underestimate. But overall, the idea is that it would all kind of even out. And if we do get it wrong, then it's only on a per-story basis. So if I lose money because I underestimated, at least it's minimized to a particular story. We're not signing up to some £1 million contract where we've got it so completely wrong that actually it costs us £5 million. And the nice thing about this is that there's no burdensome change request process, and it's a bit more slick than giving a price per work package, because each time you get something new to do, you don't have to think about how much it's going to cost you. You just estimate it with the developers and continue the process. So it just makes it a lot more slick. So does this work? How can we make this work in practice? Did it work when I tried it? Trust. Trust is one of the key things in this process. When I was trying to sell this internally about this new way that we could sell projects to customers or to this particular customer, people were like, well, that's great because, if you fall behind, then you can just up the estimates, can't you? And I'm like, no, that's not the point, because as soon as that trust breaks down, the customer's not going to renew. So at the end of the day, you're going to be out of pocket more than if you were just honest in the first place. And so one of the big ways that we've got trust in the process is we always have the customer present for our planning poker estimation sessions. So we're all in a room with all the developers, any BA, solution architect, whoever, and the customer can totally hear what we're talking about. And when the estimates vary wildly, customer gets to hear that. They get to hear, warts and all, what the developers think. And we don't censor the developers on this either. It's all about building up the trust and confidence in the process. So other advice I'd give to make this work is the preparation. So, you can't skimp on those activities before the development. You need to have those detailed design discussions. The stories need to be quite detailed. Now, that may feel a bit less agile. You might get accusations of a scrummerfall, where, you're kind of doing mini waterfall for everything. But to a certain extent, I think you need that extra detail that you might not necessarily get or do beforehand if you were doing, say, in-house development. Typically your development team isn't going to be located in the same building as your customer, so you can't just get up and go and ask the customer a question. And if you're going back to the stories later to work out if something is an issue or a feature, you're going to have to refer back to what you agreed to do in the stories. So, adding mock-ups, scenarios, diagrams, that all works well for this. And if you can lob it onto a digital board, that makes it very easy for both sides to work off the same information. So this is a typical story from the project. So we've got the original description, which is kind of quoted from the customer. This one we actually mainly implemented with something that had already been done with some extra changes. So, maybe this is less detail or more detail than stories that you're used to. I don't know. So bonus include acceptance criteria. Now, in an ideal world, the customer will be sat down with us writing the acceptance criteria at the point that we're writing the stories. Unfortunately, a lot of customers, the reason they've got you in the first place to do the development is because they haven't got time to do the development themselves. So if you can get them to write the acceptance criteria, great. We end up actually writing that ourselves and then having the customer validate that. One of the ways we do that is collaborative test tools. So this enables us to write kind of a set of steps for the customer to go through what we've delivered and actually check it off. So this is Jira. There's a plugin called Zephyr that goes into Jira that allows you to run sort of cycles of tests. I'm sure there are other things from other companies that do the same kind of thing. There are other, as well as Jira, you've got Sandglass, Pivotal Tracker, other online digital board type things. I was quite skeptical about the digital board at the start of the project. I'd always been, one for physical boards, moving cards around. You could maybe have a physical board and then just replicate the information into here. But, these days, if you're doing your stand-ups around a board, there's no reason why you can't have a big screen where you do your stand-ups and you can all huddle around your digital board. It doesn't, I'm not sure you would lose too much there. And this is our board, which the customer can see and we work from on a daily basis. And the other good thing about the digital type boards is you get the reporting and the tracking for free. And again, we're not hiding anything here. If the customer wants to see how we're doing in our sprint or whether we've delivered as many IDDs as we said we would, it's all there freely available for them to see. We're not hiding anything. So what could possibly go wrong? Why isn't everybody doing it? Are you doing it? Is anybody doing it? So what's the relationship between sprints or iterations, drops, and points? What happens if we say, right, we're going to do 10 sprints for 100 points and we don't deliver them, all of those points in that time? Or what if we over-deliver? So say we deliver those points early, does the customer still get the same number of drops? And we spent quite a lot of time discussing this, but in the end we just settled on the simple fact that we have to deliver that many points. And if we deliver them early, then the customer gets less sprints. And if we don't deliver in the time that we thought, the customer gets more sprints. So we've had this more than once in a particular phase. It's quite difficult to get your velocity back on track if you start going off track for whatever reason. So we've had scenarios where we've gone off track, and it doesn't matter often if you put on extra resources. Trying to claw back the points that you lost last month is hard. So we go off track, we carry on, we don't quite get back on track again, and we end up having to add on an extra drop. And I have to say, I did missell this a little bit internally when I was selling the concept originally. I was like, it's great, we'll do these points, and it's 10 months, and we'll just deliver the points. And I don't think people internally had quite realized that actually there is risk there, because, if all your team gets run over by a bus tomorrow, then you're not going to deliver any points, and your project will continue a lot longer than you thought, and you'll end up losing money. So one of the other big challenges that I found is feeding the backlog. The backlog's like a hungry dog. It's always there asking for more food. Before you know it, the next sprint is upon you. And if you haven't got enough stuff that is in a suitable form for the developers to get going on, then what do? Does the development team just, kick their feet up? If they do, then you're accruing cost for them, even though they're not doing anything. So we've been pretty close on many occasions to not having enough specified. Now, again, having a good customer is very important for this, because you'll be at the start of a month and your customer will say, well, next month, look, I really want to get this feature in, so let's workshop this month. But the feature turns out to be really complicated, and you get to the end of the month and you've had 3 workshops and you still can't quite agree with the users how you're going to approach this. And all that month you've spent so much time talking about this really complicated thing that you haven't got anything else ready to take up the sprint backlog for when the sprint starts. So keeping an eye on that all the time is really critical. And from a contractual point of view, we've not really figured out what it means if we don't have enough. I suppose you could argue that if it's because we haven't got enough specified, then it's Sony's fault and we should just take the cost. But if there's nobody available at the customer side to discuss these things, you could argue that they're the ones who are delaying. So another tool that we used here was to have 2 backlogs. So in Agile, you would typically have a product backlog and a sprint backlog. Sprint backlog is what you're doing in your sprint, and the product backlog is the whole thing. But we just extended the sprint backlog a bit more to include anything that's ready for that to go into the next sprint, or maybe the sprint after that. And by separating those 2 things out, it gives you a lot better visibility on how much stuff you've got that's ready to go. And then the last thing that you really need to think about that can go wrong is how to deal with support or operations, I guess, is what people call it these days. But in Sony, it's called support, where you normally have a big project. So again, thinking back to our old example of the tape decks, the cameras, the video switches, you deliver this and then say the tape deck breaks and you phone support and you say, my tape deck's broken, can you send me another one? Support say, yep, that's fine, I know how to do that. But there's nothing really changing about the system. So when things go wrong, the operations guys are really happy dealing with this stuff, and they know what to do. But suddenly, we've completely ruined their world. Instead of having a not live system that goes live with little change, we've got this big bit in the middle where they're responsible for the system because the support contract started once the system went live. But these pesky developers over here, they keep on changing stuff. They're delivering new stuff every month. If you're a support person, how are you expected to deal with that? And this really brings in the sort of DevOps sessions that have been had during the conference, that whole movement, and it really forces you to engage with some of the practices of bringing those operations people into development. I'm not going to make a big speech about DevOps, but unless you sort this out, what you'll end up with is some very unhappy operations people, and it'll also impact your ability to deliver the IDDs that you've committed to, because you'll get lots of calls from the operations people asking you to help out. So you need to factor that in. So, final thoughts. How can you make this work? What are the success factors to make this work? So the first one is about the people and the responsibilities, really having the right customer. We had a really pragmatic customer who wanted to work this way and really happy to take responsibility for stuff. So any decisions we make about what to pull out of the sprint, what to put in the sprint, whether to making certain decisions about what's going live and what's not, the customer's always there with us, making decisions together, and particularly that product owner role is key. Could you take a customer who's not so nice and get them to do this methodology? I think that would be a question. I'd really like to see somebody take a really horrible customer and try this method with them and see if it works. I don't know. Engage and be honest. So don't try and game the system. Be honest, keep your integrity, and don't let anybody higher up in the chain try and tell you otherwise. We talk to our customer pretty much every day. We have scrum calls with the customer. It's a high-touch engagement. It's not one of those sorts of engagements where the customer signs up to something, walks away, and then comes back 6 months or a year later. And we have the advantage that we know the domain really well. We know what we're delivering. We've done this type of project many times before, so we're confident about our estimation. The people in the teams are pretty consistent. Could you do this with a new area of technology? Could be worth a try, but again, you maybe don't have quite the confidence there that would be enough to bring the customer on board. I don't know. Interesting question. And I'm sure there's still a place for fixed price, fixed scope, or T&M. And hey, if you can get your customer to sign up for T&M with no questions asked, then go for it. All credit to you. Need to be an open-ended contract where you can walk away at any time. Yeah. And that's it. Has anybody got any questions?
One of the aspects of Agile is that during a sprint, the project, the customer, whoever it is, isn't supposed to interfere.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be closed. But you were saying you were having... Hello. You were saying that you were having ongoing interaction with the customer. They're part of the scrum calls, etc., which seems to me against that. How did you stop them from interfering? There seems to be a bit too much interference.
Yeah, so how do we stop the customer from interfering? So I probably wasn't very clear on that. So once we've committed to what's in the sprint, the customer can't change it. So we're having daily conversations, but that's more about, you know, the operation of the platform, talking about things on the backlog, talking about any support issues, but the sprint is still sacred. You know, once we've signed up to what we're delivering in that sprint, we're doing, you know, normal Scrum from that point of view. And actually, and the customer respects that. And again, that comes back to having the mature, responsible, pragmatic customer who's going to respect that, because otherwise, I think the process is just going to fall apart.
Just so I understand, the model is actually a fixed price per feature function.
Per IDD, per feature function, yeah.
Yeah, but the IDD is just a way of making a fixed price. So you're saying,
yes,
to deliver this screen, I'll use 7 days at £5,000. So that's a fixed price.
Yes.
Once you've defined that, that price doesn't change.
Exactly, yes.
It could take 20 days or it could take 2 days.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's up to me as the vendor. I'm making a commitment to deliver it for 7. If it takes me 20, that's my bad. It's fixed price, yeah.
How can you include technical refactorings into this approach?
How can I include the
technical work like refactoring or cleanup or redoing some work from the past which turned out to be not so good? Yeah,
so that's a good question. So I think, again, it comes back to being honest and making sure that the customer is present at the estimation and the planning poker sessions. So if we get to a feature and the developers say, well, look, we really can't do that as part of this piece of work without a big refactoring, we have to put that into the estimate. So it doesn't give much scope for refactoring things which aren't changing, but if you get to an area which is being changed for a new feature, you have to bundle that estimate in, and the customer has to accept that. And again, without a mature customer, again, I think that would be very difficult. But because we're being open and honest about what it takes, you know, I think we can do that. So we've had a feature recently where the customer has a particular workflow to do some functionality, and what they've wanted to do is augment that to do a lot more functionality. And we've said to them, well, look, we can't really build that on top of the one we've already got. We need to start afresh. And actually, they've been fine with that. You know, there are benefits for them as well, because it means the old functionality can run on the old version, and by developing this new version separately, with completely new code, it means that they can continue their business operations on the old one without having any risk that we're going to break things with this new development. So, yeah, I think it gets back to having an understanding customer.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the party.